This presentation will pick up where we left off with the categories of DD and DCD, and we discussed what DD meant, developmental delays, in our class time. And so this presentation is going to talk to you about what is the developmental cognitive disability category. I handed out some papers during class time, one of which was the Minnesota criteria for DD, so have that handy so that I can refer to that as I go through this part of the presentation. So this is the definition for developmental cognitive disabilities according to the state of Minnesota, Minnesota Department of Ed website. Most of the definitions from the state of Minnesota are exact versions or slightly edited versions of the federal definitions of these disabilities. And so as you can see here, a developmental cognitive disability is a condition, and these are important things to note, resulting in a significantly below average intellectual functioning, number one. So a low IQ, as we talked about IQ, and we'll take a look at those numbers exactly as we take a further look at DCD. So that's number one. And concurrent deficits in adaptive behavior. Adaptive behaviors are behaviors in which how we function in society. Can we feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, support ourselves? Those are the adaptive skills that we learn in school. So DCD, cognitive disability, means that they have a low IQ and have weaknesses in adaptive skills. Weaknesses in adaptive skills that affect their education, and because of that require special education services. It's also important to note what DCD does not include, and DCD does not include things such as a traumatic brain injury, an injury that might have happened after birth because of an accident, or could have happened during birth. It does not include autism. It does not include multiple impairments. And then, of course, cultural influences or inconsistent education programming, meaning that the education was lacking for several years and therefore the student is behind. Those things are not included in this category. So if you look at that checklist that I gave you, it talks about the different kinds of things that must be included in the diagnosis. So when it comes to the adaptive behavior, here is what we're talking about in numeric terms as well. A composite score at or below the 15th percentile, meaning that, remember, percentiles that's the number of people that you scored better than on a test. So in this case, if you do the math, 85% of the population scores better on this test than someone who is classified as DCD. And it's a nationally normed measure of adaptive behavior, and we'll take a look at one of those nationally normed tests. The documentation of needs and the level of support is required in at least 4 of these 7 areas that you see here below. And these things can only really be determined as a weakness based on observation and interaction. So daily living in excuse me, independent skills such as dressing, feeding, toileting, social and interpersonal skills. So their social skills definitely are lacking here, where they might have difficulty reading social cues or providing social cues. Communication, academic, recreation and leisure skills, the ability to engage in those appropriately without support. Community participation skills, which are similar to recreation and leisure skills, but these might be more things that you want to look at, such as contributing as a voter and other things within the community. And then work and work-related skills. So that's the adaptive evaluation. And then the intellectual aspect of it is measured simply by using the IQ test. So they say for the definition, it is significantly below average general intellectual functioning. So here are the numbers, and we'll take a look at the graph and what that means. But if you are a mild to moderate cognitively delayed, you're at the 2 standard deviation or below. And if you are severe and profound, you are at 3 standard deviations, plus or minus 1 standard for error of measurement. And the error of measurement does come into the test. So this must be verified through at least 2, through a written summary of results from 2 systematic observations, medical and education histories, and 1 or more of the following, some type of test, or clinical interviews. You can see that for a person that has a cognitive disability, if it's a severe cognitive disability, they might not even be able to take an IQ test. So the IQ test can't be the sole determining factor of whether or not they have a below IQ, because they might not be able to take the test. So then instead, these would be the measures that you see here that would be utilized instead. So if we take a look at this, students that have mild to moderate would fall from the 70 to 55. And those that have severe fall below 55. So 55 to 70 is mild to moderate, and then right at 54 and below, you are severe profound. In the state of Minnesota now, this is the 2015 child count data, and the 2017 was just released, so I will have to update this, but this number is fairly stable. And so you can see in the state of Minnesota that developmental delays, what we talked about previously, the DD, developmental delays are things that perhaps a child might even outgrow. Those are about 22% of the children in Minnesota are getting services for that. And then when we have the mild to moderate, that 55 to 70 range, that's about 4.2% of our population, and the severe profound are 1.5% of our population. So not a large population by any means. The service areas that we provide for these students are all throughout these different areas. So we may provide, obviously, daily living and independent skills through social skills classes. They might get speech and language pathology. They are going to have, in this case, not just accommodations where you change the structure but not the objective. You might also, in this case, have to do modifications where you change the objective. That the standards that these children will meet will be different. And then, of course, a big part is moving that student to a work and work-related skill so that when they graduate from school, they are able to work in the community and provide some sort of living for themselves. So this is a listing of the different types of tests that you would have for adaptive behavior. The ABAS is one test that is used quite often, and then there's the ABES, and as you can see down the line, and then the other one that is used quite often, at least in my experience, is the Vinland Adaptive Behavior Scales. And I'm going to jump out to let you see a few of the questions on that one. So the Vinland scale is, and this is a really bad PDF copy online of it. Somebody just scanned it in, probably for the same purposes of what I'm doing, to just show what some of the questions are like on it. So we'll just take there's different domains that they measure, and you can see this is all self-reported as a 2, 1, or 0. Obviously, if a child scores a 2, that's a high level of need or indicates things, and then it goes into the next category, which is communication, and then into daily living. And so it looks at all those domains that are considered part of the adaptive behaviors. And so that's how adaptive behaviors are assessed. Okay, something that I want you to think about and consider is universal design. And universal design is not just limited to students with cognitive delays. Universal design is in place for all types of learning situations, what UDL does is it changes the representation of information, or the mode in which you can access the information. So, for example, textbooks are primarily visual, but a UDL might provide that textbook in audio and video format as well. So I'm going to run this short little video on what UDL is, and it'll give you a few more ideas about what we're talking about when we talk about something that's universal design.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal design for learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal design for learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interest and autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways. Allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal design for learning equals learning opportunities for all. For more information on UDL, go to www.udl.org. www.cast.org.
Okay, so this particular concept is actually something that I think should probably appear on our Bethany lesson planning template right after the objective that you select for your lessons, because what you're doing throughout that lesson is asking yourself, what are the barriers that that exist in my classroom that might prevent one of my students or some of my students with specific needs or learning differences to meet that goal. So, for example, if you had a student that had a hearing impairment and your lesson was that they would be able to view and comprehend a video that you're showing in class, or that's part of the lesson, it would make sense then that you would have closed captioning. That would be some sort of a UDL modification or accommodation that you would put in the lesson plan. So when you think about that, and as you get to your lesson planning, when we look at the differentiation areas, this is another place where you'll want to think about, how can I have different representations of this material? Can I beyond just maybe audio, me talking, maybe I'll have to have some visuals, or maybe I'll have to have copies of notes, or how am I going to give them other ways to represent that information? Action and expression, how can the students show what they've learned in perhaps a different way? And then finally, how am I going to engage them in different ways to make sure that they're learning? So as we take a step now into the world of the developmentally cognitive disabilities, let's take a look at some of the accommodations and modifications that are going to need to be used for these students. And I'm going to tell you that these are mostly going to be accommodations, and the accommodations will affect the content because that's part of their needs. But some of these will also be accommodations that might work for other disabilities as well. So if we go into what's called assistive technology is any kind of technology that supports or assists the students in gaining access to the information. So I know when you hear the word technology, right away you think, oh man, she's talking computers. And that is some of what assistive technology complies with, but there are also other forms of it. We have low-tech forms, such as note-taking recorders. That could be as simple as maybe the Google app, where you type, open up a Google Doc and run the app that it's called Google Talk, and it allows them to talk to the computer, and they can record notes that way. It could be even a cell phone that's recording the audio. But think about little things like this. They're little, but they're important. Things like pencil grips to adjust the grip of a student on their pencil. That's assistive technology. NCR paper I don't think is really used much anymore, but this was an assistive technology a few years ago. What an NCR paper is it's paper that has carbon on the backside, and what students would do is, if they were assigned a peer note taker, the peer note taker might put NCR paper under their notebook paper, and then it would copy the notes directly for the student. They wouldn't have to go to a copier and get it. But at this point now, it's just much easier to take the notebook and take it to a copier. Even calculators, things like that are all considered assistive technology. So what kinds of assistive technology in the low-tech areas might you need to provide your students? And then there are the high-tech areas, which is the word prediction and voice recognition that I talked about in Google Type. And I think I've showed everybody what Google Type looks like. If not, I will show it to you in class if you ask, or for sure you'll see it in EdTech. But it's a free app in Google. It's under Tools, and it simply types whatever is being said in the room at the time. And then we're going to talk about some things called augmentative communication devices. I'll show you what those look like. The one that will look like is a Dynavox. And then sometimes different keyboards for the computer are needed. Larger keys or keys in different places, things like that might be needed. So those are all considered assistive technology. Some students are going to need a modification of the hearing their ability to hear. So a teacher might wear what's called an FM system. Perhaps you've seen that in some of the classrooms that you visited. And what it is it looks like, for the student side of things, you'll see behind their ear, it usually, I'll be honest with you, most of the time it plugs into their cochlear implant, but on occasion it's a separate like hearing aid that the student wears when they're in class. And this hearing aid connects, as you can see, to the teacher, and the teacher's wearing this microphone around their neck. It's all battery operated so that when the teacher talks, their voice is amplified. What's useful about this is that at times, just like this teacher is in this picture, they're going to face the board, and the student can't read their lips. So having the voice amplified when the teacher's not facing the student is very important. Some FM systems also come with external microphones, and the students are able, we place them around the classroom so that when there's student discussion, they're able to pick that up as well. Here's the Dynavox, and I'm just going to run a quick little video of that so you can kind of see what the Dynavox is all about.
Okay, so tell me what you have so far, Jenny.
I want Shane and I to go to Walmart and buy.
And buy something. You want to buy something at Walmart? What would you like to buy? Can you tell me what you want to buy at Walmart? You finish your sentence. What would you like to buy at Walmart? Would you like to buy toys, or would you like to buy food? You go to McDonald's. There's all kinds of choices to buy.
I want Shane and I to go to Walmart and buy.
Yes, I know that, but what is it that you want to buy? Can you write in a word that tells Mommy what you would like to buy there?
J.
Okay, you're writing in a word?
Okay, so you can see from this close-up of the screen, the Dynavox isn't like just a keyboard where you would type letters, although that's kind of what she's doing here. Also programmed into the Dynavox are words and commonly used phrases so that a person using a Dynavox doesn't have to spell everything they want to say letter by letter. They can select for words and phrases that are programmed in. Now this particular student is using her fingers to, or I should say a joystick, you can see, but there's also back here where you see in this picture, you see the head pointer. The head pointer would have a laser light at the end that the Dynavox could also read as well. So Dynavox is used for students that have severe communication impairment and need a voice to talk for them. In general, students with cognitive disabilities are going to need very systematic instruction. So systematic instruction is more direct in nature, where you would a traditional lesson with indirect instruction. So as I go through these pieces, you're going to say, well, this is pretty much a standard lesson plan. So obviously, any lesson is going to have a well-defined shared target. So what's the learning objective for the student? And then here's where you have to really think more, probably even more carefully than you would in a general ed classroom. where you break down the skill into steps, into the process, break it down into as small pieces as you can think of. And then as you're going through, what would be prompts or cues that you put in along the way to lead them to the next step. Then you teach them step by step by step. Once that process is learned, then you can build on the foundation and monitor that there's no regression. So very systematic instruction is very important for students with DCD. These students can learn skills. This was proven by many research studies that there are lots of things that these students can learn, but it takes much longer and much more systematic instruction for them to accomplish that generalization where the skill is learned and can be applied. So we'll take a quick little look at where there's a reinforcement of the target behavior. As you can see, well, looks like this one's unavailable. So we're just going to skip to the next thing. Another strategy is class-wide peer tutoring, and I have mentioned this one before. It's one of the interventions that I talked about that you could use in a classroom where you're trying to determine pre-referral interventions. Class-wide peer tutoring is a research-based intervention. So what class-wide peer tutoring is just exactly what it sounds like. You're using peers to provide instruction and feedback to the students. So it's students teaching students, and it requires both high and lower order skilled students in a mixed group. And again, research has shown that whoever does the teaching in many classrooms does the learning. So giving your students opportunities to teach something that they know or they think they know is a really great way to reinforce the skills for them and to solidify the learning for a student that has already got it but maybe needs some solidification, and also allows them to support students that don't get it, and it helps them maybe present the information in a way that you hadn't thought of but is maybe more relevant for the students. And I think we have some of the other elements of it, or pros and cons of class-wide peer tutoring. Another use of technology is more the use of recording. This works really well, especially in social skills for the students or life skills. For example, if I wanted to teach the student how to make some sort of recipe, to follow some sort of recipe, I would use my technology to help me teach them that. I would videotape myself recreating the recipe, stating the steps out loud, perhaps also have a checklist to go along with the video so that they can follow with that. And the advantage of having it videotaped is that the student can pause, skip, replay, all those things to help them practice that information over and over again. This is now a relatively low-cost technology. You're able to record things on your cell phone in a pretty easy manner, and obviously computers have the ability to do that if you have a built-in camera, which most computers do. So using that to teach some of these skills or to pre-teach some of these skills is really useful. Okay, as we're wrapping up now on DCD, we do need to talk about the movement of a student with DCD, and we'll talk about this every time we talk about a different disability category. Is what does transition look like for these students? Transition is mandated. We have to plan transition as part of the IEP process as soon as the child is about in 6th grade. So the transition planning begins as an exploration of careers and ideas in those lower grades, and then as they get into high school, it becomes actually moving them into perhaps internships or jobs outside of school that help to reinforce their transition. So eligible students are entitled to services, and I've said this before, until they're 21. So if a student hasn't completed their transition goals by the time their age peers are graduating from high school, they can stay in high school longer until that happens. And then as they move out into the real world, into the work world, into life beyond high school, then there's different support services that kick in to take care of them. For example, Social Security for students with cognitive disabilities, they are eligible for Social Security benefits upon their when they turn 18 years old. They are also eligible for support from the state and federal government on job training. So there's a service in Minnesota that is called Vocational Rehabilitative Services, and those students start working with their counselor in Voc Rehab Services when they're sophomores or juniors in high school, and they might actually be already working in a job that might be their permanent job when they leave high school. But what will happen is the Voc Rehab people oftentimes will have trainers that go to work with the students to help them learn their job. Medicaid is going to need to be available to them to cover their home and their medical expenses as well. And then there's other services that they are entitled to, all through government services. So that diagnosis or that label of cognitive disability then leads these students into these other programs upon graduation from high school. Here's just another way to look at it. What are some things that we need to plan for when we're planning for transition? The academic skills actually become very minimal. What we're moving towards for these students with cognitive disabilities is helping them learn life skills, helping them find employment skills and self-determination skills so that they can perhaps even live on their own or live outside of their family home, perhaps in a group home. And so we also work then in programs for cognitive disabilities on domestic skills and community skills as well. Things like learning to grocery shop, things like learning how to do their laundry. Those are all things that come in with that. I want to bring up the Olmstead Act at this time because Olmstead Act was something. It's an act now that's been in place for a while, but it was started by the two ladies that you see in the picture here. These two women, Lois and Elaine, had mental illness and developmental disabilities, and because of the mental illness aspect, especially of their disability, they were admitted to a psychiatric hospital. After their treatment was completed, the mental health community there at the hospital said, well, their treatment is done and we're good and they're ready to move into real life, back to community life, but there was no place to support them. They couldn't find a place to send these women. And so because they had no place to send them, they remained hospitalized in the mental health ward for years past when they needed to be, when they were able to leave. And because of that, these women, people on the behalf of these women, filed a lawsuit under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they had to get a release from the hospital, but also this act entitles them to services that are appropriate, supporting them in the community. So they should have appropriate community-based services that are reasonably accommodated to help them be successful in life. So the Olmstead Act is like I said, a newer act on the horizon, and so you might hear from time to time about legislation or laws that are being moved forward, or activities or services that are being created based on the need evidenced by the Olmstead Act. Things that are important to help these students with self-determination is to try to get them into community residential facilities, so they aren't necessarily having to be spend the rest of their adult life living at home under the care of their parents, but instead they're in some sort of a community home where some of the responsibilities for caring for themselves are in their hands, with maybe supervision by state employees. Supported living is another way of looking at that. Sheltered workshop is where they go to jobs that are created specifically and especially for in a workshop for individuals with with disabilities. So that would be like if you would work at Easter Seals in their packaging plant. They have many different jobs in the Easter Seal plant. There's a plant up in the Twin Cities, and I'm sure that there are MRCI groups here in Mankato where you go to work and you work at the sheltered workshop. Some might actually be able to go into competitive employment where they go into the workforce working for places like Walmart or Target or wherever they find a good placement for them. If it's supported competitive employment, then there's somebody there that's kind of supporting them in the job to get a competitive wage, whereas in competitive employment they're there and they don't have anybody really helping them through their job. And then other times there's customized employment that might work for them. Okay, so this is the end of the presentation for DCD, and as you take a look at your homework for the rest of the week, you should finish up the Chapter 5 guided questions. We are going to start with those, going through those selected questions the next time we have face-to-face class. I want you to do this forum, the Cognitive Disabilities in the Inclusive Environment forum. You're going to see a little guy named Damien, and you're going to answer these questions after you watch the video, answering how would you help him fit into your classroom to make friends, and how would you help him manage communication, movement, and learning in your classroom. This presentation, the slides for the presentation on developmental disabilities is here, and linked in this video link you will see the link to the Google presentation slides for this particular part of the presentation for cognitive disabilities. All right, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. Please note that everything is due by Sunday night before the next week starts. So have a good week, and we'll see you then in class on Monday or Tuesday.